The Xbox franchise has been running for a good 20 years, and over that course of time, 3 consoles have come out of it, each with multiple variations of controllers. Some of these controllers are really good, and others, in my opinion, fall behind the rest pretty drastically. So I figured it'd be a fun idea for a video to rank every Xbox controller, and not only that, but I'll be putting out videos for every PlayStation and every Nintendo controller in the coming weeks. We'll grade them on a tier list based on my opinion, which is formulated through things like aesthetics and comfortability. It's all personal opinion, so while I'd love to hear your opinions down in the comments, don't be angry if you disagree. This is just what I personally prefer. Now before we start, remember to subscribe. I talk about video games and internet phenomena in a few different series on this channel, so if any of that interests you, be sure to subscribe to never miss an upload. I also live stream from time to time right here on this YouTube channel, so if you want to come hang out, crack some jokes, or discuss stuff, come join us sometime. If you can't make it to those streams live, feel free to subscribe to my second channel, RatedEm Live. I upload all the best moments from my live streams onto there. With all of that out of the way, let's rank the Xbox controllers. So just to lay down some ground rules, we're taking a look at controllers officially released by Microsoft. We are not looking at third-party controllers, and peripherals like the Kinect will probably leave out too. Let's first start off with the Duke. Now, I hate to admit it, but I've never used an original Xbox before, so I've never held this controller before, I'm sorry. However, I absolutely love the design of it. The Duke is known for its uncomfortable size, but honestly, I really like the design of it. It's extremely unique, and it's definitely a relic of its time, and I really like that about it. I'm gonna put it in A tier just based on aesthetics alone. I would put it in S, but again, I've never used it, so I feel like I can't put it that high. Next up is the original Xbox controller's redesign, and I'm not too pleased with this one. Although it's probably way more comfortable than the original Duke controller, it doesn't look all too great. I feel like the Duke's over-the-top design really made it stand out, especially when the original Xbox's whole shtick was that it was like this otherworldly technology. With that being said, this redesign does kind of form the standard for all future Xbox controllers. They don't change all too much after this one, so I can't really knock it for that. I'll put it at B tier because although it's very impactful, it sucks that it loses a lot of the charm the original controller had. Next up is the Xbox 360 controller, which I am more than familiar with. When I hear the word controller, this is the first thing that comes to my mind. Although I just bashed the OG Xbox redesign for being a bit too boring, I actually think the sleek design of the 360 controller is actually really good looking. The smooth plastic is one of the most memorable things about the controller for me, alongside the heavy battery pack on the back of it, which isn't inherently bad. The space in between the grips and the battery pack was actually very comfortable in my opinion, and every button on this thing felt really good. Except for the D-pad. I'm really sorry, but I absolutely hate the 360 D-pad. It feels way too big, and although it wasn't imprecise for my memory, it felt like it could be. It's just a personal grudge I have. Also, this controller only felt good if it was an authentic one. I have used third-party imitation controllers, and although it's nice to be able to plug them in rather than having to worry about batteries, they never felt as good as the real deal. I'm gonna put this one at A tier because it's really good, but there's a controller on here that I much prefer over it. Next up, we're looking at the original Xbox One controller. This one I've also put a lot of use into, and it's not terrible, but it's not my first pick. I actually remember it being kind of heavy, which I mentioned earlier wasn't a terrible thing, but I think this controller was just unnecessarily heavy. Like, it was obvious the batteries weren't the majority of the weight. The shoulder buttons were also extremely flimsy. I broke one by accident by knocking my controller off my desk, I think, but the left one broke just from repeated use. I'm gonna put this one down at C tier. I'm really not the biggest fan. Next up, however, is the Xbox One redesign controller. I think this thing came out with the release of the Xbox One S, which was a more like slimmed down version of the Xbox One console. And wow, this controller is great. I actually still use it to this very day. It's my favorite controller to use when I need one. All the buttons feel great. It's got Bluetooth functionality, so it's compatible with your phone or PC, and it feels lighter than the original. The plastic also feels very comfortable to hold. Arguably, my favorite part of this controller is the D-pad. Now, this D-pad was featured on the original Xbox One controller, but it really stands out on this one because every other part of the controller feels just as good. This D-pad isn't too big, it isn't too small, it doesn't feel flimsy, and it feels very crisp to click. Playing fighting games with this D-pad honestly makes my experience so much more enjoyable. It feels great. This one is an S tier pick for me. Now let's move on to the most recent controller, the Series X controller. This thing sucks big time. The plastic feels way too grainy for me. I hate the face of it being like smoothed over when the other Xbox One controllers had this kind of designated indent for the home button. The share button is also so unnecessary, and the D-pad feels spiky and uncomfortable. I hate everything about this controller. I do appreciate that it uses Type-C cables rather than the micro USB if you're looking to plug it into a PC, but that's really the only good thing about it. This one's going right to the F tier for me. I want to quickly talk about one more controller before we close up the video, and if you want to consider this an honorable mention, you could, but I do want to bring up the adaptive controller. The adaptive controller is essentially the motherboard of an Xbox controller, and then through ports on the back of it, you can like map third-party buttons to each input that a regular controller would have. It also has these two big buttons on the front of it. I've always been and will always be an advocate for accessibility in gaming, and this is a really good step in that direction, so I'm gonna give it an honorary S tier. So there you have it, every mainline Xbox controller ranked. Again, I plan to do this for the PlayStation controllers and the Nintendo controllers, so if you don't want to miss those videos, I highly recommend you to subscribe. Thanks for tuning in. Again, I don't have an outro, but check out the videos on screen now. They're great and super entertaining and really cool and awesome, and you should watch them and click on them and like them and subscribe, and please, I'm begging you to subscribe.